Hi, this is Stan Bush.
Hi, this is Stephanie Calvert.
This is John Payne.
This is Jack Hughes.
Hey everyone, this is Britt Lightning from Vixen.
Hi, I'm Carrie Stevens.
Hello, I'm Kofi Baker.
And you're listening to Play That Rock and Roll.
Hello, classic rock fans. I am here with a special bonus episode that is going to be just me recounting my experience at Rocknpod 2025. All of my interviews from Rocknpod are now up on the YouTube channel and in the podcast feed, so you can hear all of the content I've produced on the channel right now. So this video is just going to be about my experience in Nashville in and around Rocknpod, because I was there for 3 days and Rocknpod was just on Saturday. So I have some little stories I can tell about what my weekend was like, and I can also give you a closer look at what Rocknpod, the day, was like, because that was a very hectic day, and I'd like to get my own memory straight of that day here on record, and also give you sort of an inside look at the event if you weren't able to attend. So if you're curious about attending Rocknpod and they announce another one in the future, maybe something in this video will be helpful for you in making that decision. So my Rocknpod trip started on Friday, April 11th at 3:30 a.m., which was how early I needed to wake up to catch my 5:10 a.m. flight from Milwaukee to Nashville. Did I need to take that early of a flight? No, but that was the one where the price was right. So I took the first flight of the day and arrived in Nashville around 7 a.m., very tired right off the bat. Now, one lesson I learned for this trip for Rocknpod that I was not aware of in 2023 when I was down there for that year's Rocknpod is that hotels will hold your luggage for you both before you check in and also after you check out. This made my trip here this year a lot easier than in 2023 when I dragged my luggage around with me everywhere like an idiot tourist. But in all fairness, that's what I was in 2023. So my flight arrived at about 7 a.m. and I took an Uber over to my hotel, which was the Holiday Inn near Vanderbilt. I dropped my bags off at about 7:30 a.m. and then I walked over to a restaurant called The Row Kitchen and Pub, which was about I'd say about a half-hour walk from the hotel. And on my walk over, I noticed a whole bunch of those scooters that you can rent via an app on your phone. And I thought that would be a good way to avoid paying for a whole bunch of Ubers, which I was anticipating having to do. And I noticed there was like at least 3 different companies that had these scooters, and they were all over the place by Vanderbilt, because walking to the restaurant, I had to pass Vanderbilt. So after having breakfast, I started walking towards downtown because I was going to spend a good chunk of my Friday downtown, but it was definitely too far to walk. So I found a scooter. It was one of the Lime brand scooters, and it took me a little while, but I got the app figured out, and I never rode one of those before, but I got used to it real quick. And I used that to get downtown, which was great. And I used those scooters quite a bit that whole weekend, which saved me a lot of money on Ubers. So I got downtown around 9:30, I think, and that was shortly after the Country Music Hall of Fame opened. And the Country Hall of Fame was absolutely something I wanted to check out, and I thought it was really good. It was just very impressive. A lot of cool exhibits. There was an exhibit about 70s Southern California rock and roll, which absolutely has some crossover appeal with country music. A lot of my favorite artists are in that scene, so I enjoyed that. I was surprised but overjoyed to see that the Country Music Hall of Fame has the Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit for some reason. So that was great to see. Got some pictures of that. And I would say I spent about 2 hours there, and it was a good time. If you're in Nashville, I would recommend it. It's very cool to go through all their exhibits, and then, of course, see all the plaques of the inducted members at the end of the museum layout. And then up above the plaques near the ceiling, you have words that say, "Will the circle be unbroken?" And that's pretty cool. So, yeah, definitely a good time at the Country Music Hall of Fame. From there, I got on another Lime scooter and I took that over to a place called the Musicians Hall of Fame. And this is a museum that's dedicated to celebrating studio musicians. People that aren't necessarily a household name, but are major players in music history. And that was a very cool place. I'm glad that place exists because these unsung heroes of music need to get their flowers. Now, of course, there's plenty of big names in the Musicians Hall of Fame, but this was meant to show what a collaborative process music creation is. So I enjoyed that. A lot of cool stuff in that place. They had exhibits that were set up based around various labels. There was a Sun Studios exhibit. There was a Stax Records exhibit. I've been to both of those places in Memphis, so it was cool to see them sort of recreated there. Yeah, they had Hitsville, USA. That's in Motown. I was just in Detroit. I didn't get to go to that one due to my own poor planning, but cool to see that exhibit. And they also had an interesting exhibit on the history of the Grammys. Now, I got out of there around, I want to say about 1:45 or 2, and I decided to go and get some lunch. And I went to Broadway downtown, where all the Star Bars are, all of the restaurants and bars that are owned by various celebrities. Morgan Wallen's got a bar down there. I think Jelly Roll has a bar on the way. John Bon Jovi has a bar. Kid Rock has a bar. John Rich from Big and Rich has a bar. I was there with Chris when we were at Rocknpod in 2023. But the place I went to get my lunch was the OG of all those Star Bars, Margaritaville. And yes, I did get this zip-up hoodie from that very Margaritaville, but I didn't get it as I was getting my lunch. I got that on Sunday just before I left when I was sure I had enough money to splurge on a souvenir. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. I went to Nashville and my souvenir was a Margaritaville zip-up hoodie. Yes. I stand by it, and I don't have to justify it. But anyway, I had a good lunch at Margaritaville, and there were some guys playing acoustic numbers in the bar area, which was cool to listen to. They played a couple of Jimmy Buffett songs, and that was nice.
Close your eyes and I'll be back again. I'll be back real soon. Oh, come on, Coral Reefers.
Then I got out of there at probably about 2:30 or 3. I thought, you know what would be fun? I'll check out a used bookstore. And I found one that was open that day. It was called Rhino Booksellers. And I had an hour or so before it would close. It wasn't the best bookstore I've ever been to, if I'm honest, but they had a healthy-sized music section, which I spent a lot of time looking through. So here, I'll show you what I got. From the music section, I only got one book, and it's called Rock and Roll. Proceed with Caution. Yeah, this is one of those Rock and Roll's the Devil music books. A balanced Christian response to the music and its message. So yeah, I know it's stupid, but this was cheap. And at some point in the future, I would like to do an episode about the whole satanic panic and rock and roll's the devil music kind of thing on this show. And, you know, maybe this balanced Christian response will give me some good insight into what those people think rock and roll is. But anyway, got this for like $2. I did get a couple of paperbacks that I was interested in. First, The Great Train Robbery by Michael Crichton. Book about a train robbery. You know what? I'm in. It doesn't take much. I'm interested. And then I've got 2 books here that I picked based on the cover alone. Heroes in Hell. So this is some book that has a bunch of historical figures all fighting with or against the devil. I don't know. It cracked me up. So I thought, you know what? This is worth the $2 or whatever it is. This could be fun. And finally, well,
it's the big show. Yes, it's a big bad show tonight.
Yes, wrestling reference in the title aside. Look at this piece of machinery here on the cover. I don't know what that's supposed to be. It looks hilarious. Again, this could be just some fun pulp trash. I don't know if I'm going to read it anytime soon. The covers got me. Spent a couple of bucks. Had a little fun at a used bookstore. So that was the last place I visited on Friday. And I got out of there just before they closed at about 5 o'clock. And at this point, I was feeling ready to get checked in and get something to eat for dinner and call it a day. Now, unfortunately, when I walked out of the bookstore, there were no Lime scooters around. Instead, I found a bike rack for something called the Nashville B cycles, which are just bikes you can rent right off a rack. And I downloaded the app and then just rode the bike from the bookstore all the way back to the hotel. So by the time I got to the hotel, between walking at the 2 Hall of Fames and on Broadway and at this bookstore and riding a bike, my feet were sore, my legs were sore, and I was dead freaking tired. I was so ready to check in and just kind of call it a night pretty early. And unfortunately, my poor feet had to suffer a little bit more because there was a massive line at 6 p.m. for check-in. And it was all like college kids. I have no idea what was going on. I don't know if these kids were all from Vanderbilt, which was nearby. I don't know if it was spring break or what, but there was a huge line for check-in, and there weren't any self-check-in kiosks. So I just had to wait for like 45 minutes to get checked in before I was able to go up to my room. That sucked. That was the worst part of the day. Once I got up to the room, I unpacked my stuff. I listened to some music, specifically Kicks, because I was getting ready for my interview with Brian Forsyth on Saturday. That is one big positive of Rocknpod 2025 for me, is that it introduced me to the music of Kicks because I was going to interview Brian. And I really like Kicks' first 3 albums. Those are 3 really good records. I got into them a lot. So, if nothing else, I'm now a Kicks fan, thanks to Rocknpod. For dinner, I walked over to a place near the hotel called Bellagio Pizza. Got a pizza from there. Now, as I was eating my pizza, I think most podcasters who were there for Rocknpod were over at 3rd and Lindsay for Rare Hair. I went to Rare Hair when I was at Rocknpod in 2023, and that was a very cool show. And I would have liked to have gone this year, but I was trying to keep my expenses down, and also I knew going in I was going to be so freaking tired. And as that show was going on, yeah, I was absolutely exhausted. Also, if I'm honest, I did not have all my questions complete for everybody that I was going to be interviewing. So I was still coming up with stuff in my hotel room, particularly for Tom Zutaut, because Tom Zutaut was going to be my first interview on Saturday morning. So I woke up on Saturday morning at about 7:30. I had my duffel bag for the day packed the night before, so after taking a quick shower, I got out of the hotel, went across the street to McDonald's for breakfast, took this picture after eating of their weird-ass sign, but anyway, after I had breakfast, I called an Uber to get over to the fairgrounds, and I got picked up. We get over to the fairgrounds, and from what I remember in 2023, the building that Rocknpod is in is at like the back of the complex. There's multiple buildings, and I got out and I went in through the back entrance, which is again what I did in 2023, which I don't think I was supposed to, but it doesn't matter. So I get into the convention hall, I get checked in, I get all my stuff for my booth, and I go over to my table, and I get my video camera set up, my laptop, my mic, put the banner down, get it all ready to go. And if I remember correctly, Bushy from the Plug podcast was one of my podcast neighbors. He was behind me. And for a moment, I got to talk to him and say hello to him and his girlfriend. And that was nice because I had met Bushy very briefly at the hotel in 2023 and we had a cool conversation outside. He seems like a really good dude. So I liked that setup. I didn't really talk to most of my other neighbors, which is to my regret. But I'll tell you, that day goes by so fast that you don't really have the time you think you have to make connections if you have interviews going on, which I did. There was a couple of podcasters at that event that I would have liked to have said hello to, or just said, hey, I listened to your show, or hey, I've seen your show, just give you a thumbs up. And I didn't get the chance to because the day went by so fast. So I do regret that. And again, that's one of those things you got to keep in mind is once that day gets started, it's going to go fast. So you cannot be thinking, oh, I'll get to it. You need to do whatever you need to do as soon as you have a break in your schedule to make sure you get to it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. As soon as you have a free second, go and do the thing that you're thinking about doing, Because again, that day goes by in a snap. My first interview of the day was Tom Zutaut. And that was an interview I was really looking forward to because he worked at Geffen Records back in the 80s. There's a great documentary about David Geffen that PBS made in their American Masters series that I've seen. I think Geffen's a fascinating figure in music history. So it was really exciting to be able to talk to someone who worked like side by side with him at that label during a tumultuous time for that label. Geffen struggled in the early 80s. And Tom Zutaut is one of the guys who was there to turn that company around and make it profitable in the late 80s by signing massive rock bands like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses. So I had a whole bunch of questions prepped for him. I got to about 3 or 4 of them because Tom is a talker and he's got some stories, and that's just fine with me because the stories he told were equal parts hilarious and also insane. So that interview was great. I had to do very little work. I just kind of set him up on a couple of things and he told me some great stories. When I met him, his wife was with him and she recorded our talk on her cell phone as well. So I don't know if that video is ever going to surface. I hope it does because the video I was recording had a problem. And man, oh man, the most frustrating aspect of my day on Saturday was the fact that I had several technical problems with my gear. And anyone who does this kind of thing will tell you it's just about the worst thing to deal with because the last thing you want to be doing at a convention like this, where you're going to be using equipment to record things, is looking up fixes for said equipment, which is what I was doing. So what happened was, when I was interviewing Tom, I had my guest mic right here that I was recording Tom with. I had a lavalier mic on my shirt that was hooked up to my phone, which was recording me. Now, that mic was actually strong enough to pick up both of us, but I was trying to get cleaner audio from my guests with this. And this was hooked up to my audio box, which went through my laptop. Now, I'm looking at my laptop as I'm recording the conversation, and I'm seeing that the audio is recording just fine. And I know the audio is recording just fine on my phone because I've got my phone app open as well. So audio-wise, I'm doing just fine for my interview with Tom Zutaut. But after a couple of minutes, I glance up to look at my video camera, the viewfinder, and I see that it is turned off. And that was an immediate cause for alarm because I knew the battery was fully charged and I knew that I had hit record. So there was no reason that the camera should have shut itself off. The important thing was the conversation was recorded via audio. So in the episode that has the Tom Zutaut interview, you don't miss anything except for the video for the back 2/3 or 3/4 of our chat. It is too bad, but there's really nothing I can do about it. So after we finish the interview, I get a picture with Tom. I say goodbye to him and his wife. I will say they were both so nice, and Tom was super easy to talk to. I really enjoyed that interview, and that was a great way to start the day as far as how I felt as a host, because I just had a good interview with my guest, and I was feeling good about that. Frustrated about the camera, but feeling good about the interview. So they went on to their next interview, and then I had a break for at least 2 hours, because that interview was scheduled at 10 a.m., was done at 10:15. My next scheduled interview was actually my panel discussion with Mark White. That was scheduled at 12:15. So I had a solid 2-hour gap. Now, in that 2-hour gap, I met Mark White and talked to him for a little bit. And again, Mark is a fantastic guy. I really enjoyed talking with him. I like the podcast that he does with his co-host Frankie J, Rock and Roll Happy Hour. If you haven't checked that show out, I would recommend it. Cool dudes. I talked to both of them for a little bit that day, and I just went over some last-minute stuff with Mark about what I was going to ask him during our panel, and he was really happy with all that, and sounded like we were good to go. So that was awesome. But before I could think about the panel, I needed to figure out what was going on with my video camera, because I wanted to record video of this. This is the first time I've ever hosted any sort of panel discussion or anything on a stage. I wanted some video of that. So I get my camera, I turn it on, I hit record, and I just start walking around the venue trying to get like B-roll footage, which was nice to have, and I'll put some of that up on screen here. And I just wanted to see how long the camera would run before it would shut itself off. And it ran for longer this time, but sure enough, without warning, it just shut itself off. So now that I've established it's done it twice in 2 attempts, I knew I had a problem. It wasn't just some one-off glitch. And I Googled the problem. So the only helpful thing I could find was that I was supposed to reformat the camera, which would delete everything I had recorded up until that point. Well, that was fine, because I only had the little bit with Tom and the video I had while walking around the venue. So I put both of those videos on my laptop and followed the instructions to reformat the camera, and then I just crossed my fingers that it would work. Now, I did have a backup camera. I could have recorded video with this, but the problem with this is that if it's set up to record video, I don't have a viewfinder, so I wouldn't know exactly what we would look like and how the shot was framed if I was recording with that. So I really wanted to use my camcorder. And just after I had figured out the camera thing and got that reformatted, my laptop told me it wanted to install an update. And I thought to myself, well, hey, I've got a whole hour before my panel. And of course, that update took like 30 or 40 minutes. So I'm now walking around the venue again, getting a little bit of B-roll while my computer is just rebooting for a very long time. I imagine there must have been some people around me who walked by, saw my laptop screen, and thought to themselves, man, I'm glad I'm not him. And because this was going on, I was kind of limited in what I was able to do as far as look at the vendors, see who else was around, say hello to people. I mean, I was able to catch up with Chris and Aaron from Decibel Geek. Those are the guys at Rocknpod who I know the best. So as my laptop was fixing itself, installing that update, I went over and caught up with those guys for a little bit. And that was great. I was happy for Chris. This was the first Rocknpod where he wasn't the guy. He wasn't the one running the whole thing. He was actually able to be there. As a podcaster, he had interviews scheduled, and I don't think he really had much of an opportunity to do that in past Rocknpods because he was the guy organizing everything and making sure everybody was where they needed to be. So I was happy for him, and it was cool to hear who they had lined up. One of the people that I know he interviewed was Joey Bro, who's a social media star. I'm sure you've been recommended a Facebook reel of him, and I'll tell you, that guy was the talk of the town at Rocknpod 2025. Everybody knew Joey Bro was at the convention, and everybody was kind of asking each other about him. Talked to those guys about that for a little while. Saw Joey Bro's little setup there. That dude had more merch than anybody else at Rocknpod. I'm pretty sure that guy had more merch for sale than some of the vendors who were selling clothes and records and all that kind of stuff. So Yeah, that dude, he's got some sharp business instincts. I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, but I thought he was a unique pick to be a special guest at a convention like this. And from what I heard of the people who did interview him, everybody seemed to like him. Seemed like a nice enough guy. And then at about 11:45, I made my way over to the main stage where I was going to be hosting that panel with Mark White. And I connected with a guy I absolutely need to say thank you again to because he was such a godsend for me at Rocknpod 2025. Andy Connors, awesome guy. And he helped me a lot with getting set up for the panel. He recorded video and very clean audio of the panel we did, which I was able to use for the episode that I've posted. The stuff that he had recorded ended up in much higher quality than what I had recorded. So, like I said, he was a total godsend for me. So, Andy, you rock. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. And then, of course, my buddy, Aaron Camaro from Decibel Geek, introduced us and brought us on stage, which was very cool of him to do. Aaron, of course, has been on this podcast as well. He's been my special guest co-host twice for my interviews with David Penzer from WCW, because Aaron's also big into wrestling. Like, he's got a whole wrestling promotion he's a part of right now. You should definitely check that out if you're a wrestling fan. So, very cool to connect with Aaron again in person after we've done these interviews. And the panel went really well. Like I said, Mark's a great guy. He liked the questions I had for him, so I don't think I let him down. And yeah, we covered some good stuff. And then in the audience of the panel discussion was another person I'd like to say thank you to for help he's given this channel over these past couple of years. A guy named Steve Roth. Steve Roth is the co-host of the DLR cast, which is all about David Lee Roth. He co-hosts that with Darren Paltrowitz, who's been a guest on this podcast because he wrote that book about David Lee Roth. Well, Steve was familiar with my show, and he's actually sent me books and set me up with some interviews, including Gary Graff, who was on the show last year. So connecting with him and being able to put a face with a name of someone who has helped me get not only books for this show, but guests for this show was awesome. So, Steve, good to meet you. Thank you for everything that you've done for this show. I really appreciate that. And he asked a great question. Mark really liked his question, so that was cool for the panel. The panel wrapped at about 1:15, 1:20, something like that, and then I had another almost 2-hour break as my next interview wasn't scheduled until 3 p.m., and that was going to be with Billy Sheehan. So I had another 2-hour gap, and this time I was able to go around to the various vendors and look at some of their stuff, and then also get ready for my afternoon interviews. Now, the good news is that I was able to record the entire panel on my video camera, so I knew at least my video camera was working again. So I felt fairly confident using that going forward. Now, in that gap I had before talking to Billy Sheehan, there was someone I was able to catch up with, and that was Jeannie Bassoni, aka Hollywood from Glow. Now, I had interviewed her back at Rocknpod 2023, and I saw on social media a week before Rocknpod 2025 that she was going to be coming to this one as well. So I sent an email and just asked her, hey, are you going to be there for sure? And she said yes. And I'm like, great. She had finished her book, so I wanted to get her book, and I thought maybe we could do like an impromptu interview. And I saw that she was there. So yeah, in between doing the panel with Mark and talking to Billy, I made a point to get over to her booth, bought her book, and here it is. Hooray for Hollywood. So I bought this copy from her, and then right away she asked if I wanted to do an interview, and I said absolutely, and I asked if 4 o'clock would work for her, because that was kind of my next gap, and I wanted some time to actually prepare some questions. I didn't want it to be totally impromptu. I like to have something ready for her. And she said that worked for her because, you know, people were coming by her booth, and I know she was selling some books. I saw a lot of people talking to her, so that was awesome to see. So at 3 o'clock, I get back to my booth for my interview with Billy Sheehan, and that was the interview I think that went the best, in the sense that I didn't really have any technical problems. Video camera recorded everything just fine. Audio recorded everything just fine. And the interview went really well. I got to ask all my questions. Billy was really nice. He even signed my Skyscraper CD, which was really cool of him. Real cool guy and someone who genuinely seems to love being around his fans. Heard so many stories about what a great guy he is. Saw him talking to fans who were both podcasters and who were just attending Rocknpod. He seemed to love being there. I guess he's been to Rocknpod a couple of times now, actually. That was one of the highlights, definitely, talking to Billy Sheehan and just seeing, again, how cool he was with the fans who were there. Because he was one of the bigger names of all the people who were attending. Okay, so after that, I had a shorter break before my next interview, which was scheduled for 3:40, and that was going to be with Brian Forsyth from Kix. Now, again, I had been listening to a ton of Kix music in the lead up to this, so I felt really good about all my questions, but unfortunately, there were some more technical problems, I guess, with my interview with Brian, because Brian has a quieter, lighter speaking voice. And I'll tell you, it is so noisy in that hall. There's so much ambient noise that everybody is already kind of talking louder than they normally would, just so we can all hear each other. So I was not prepared for a guest who wasn't kind of talking at that register. Now, as soon as he started talking, I realized, I don't know if this mic is going to pick it up. So if you watch that interview, I hope I wasn't too obnoxious for him, but I'm trying very hard to get this mic as close to his mouth as I can to pick up his audio. And again, I feel like a jerk for having to do that, but I was worried. And unfortunately, that really wasn't enough because this mic sucks. I don't want to shit talk the Rode brand because I've used this mic before. I used this at Rocknpod in 2023 and it seemed to be just fine. So I don't know what happened, but between Brian's voice and the ambient noise, this mic picked up almost nothing. The audio was junk. So the interview you hear, most of that audio with Brian came from my lavalier mic, which was hooked up to my shirt. Now, had I given him the lavalier mic and I talked into this, it would have ended up being a lot better. But I didn't know that was going to be the case because when I tested both mics, I was doing that in my basement, which had no ambient noise. I was not testing that in a room with a bunch of, people talking all around me. So unfortunately, the audio is tough with my interview with Brian. But if you watch the video on YouTube, I think the audio is clean enough that you should be able to pick up pretty much everything he was saying. And it's too bad the audio is tough because the interview was awesome. It was really cool talking to him. He told some great stories and gave some good insight into that band. And he's a really nice guy, and I didn't know much about Kix. What I've learned since is that band just got a raw deal. They should have been a lot bigger than they were. They're one of those bands that if you know, you know. And now, thankfully, I can say I know. So yeah, if you're not familiar, I would recommend any of the first 3 albums. So after my chat with Brian, I had another hour gap between 4 and 5 before my last interview of the day. And in that time was when I was able to talk to Jeannie about her new book, Hooray for Hollywood. So it was great catching up with her, and I was able to add a bonus interview to my schedule of that day and get a little extra content out of the whole weekend. But mostly it was just nice catching up with Jeannie. And then my final interview of the day was with Robert Fleischman. This was the interview that I was I would say, least prepared for. I knew he had a very brief stint with Journey in their early days, and I know he had sort of a convoluted stint with Vinnie Vincent in the late 80s. And I watched a couple of interviews where he talked about both at length, and I decided I didn't really want to get into the Vinnie Vincent stuff because he's talked about that on a lot of podcasts, and I'm sure at Rocknpod he was going to get those questions. So I limited my questions to be about the new album he was promoting and some of the work he did with Journey back in the day. And again, he was a real nice guy. Turns out he lives in Wisconsin, which I didn't know up until shortly before, and that's awesome. I'm here in Wisconsin. I don't know if I've ever been in the same place as him at the same time, but it's possible. But if I ever run into him in person, I would definitely say hi because he's a very nice guy, Really enjoyed that conversation. Interesting guy. Very much an artiste. Very much somebody who does what he does for the love of creating art. He doesn't seem to be under any real pressure to make money for some label. So it's very cool to talk to someone who's able to create the art he wants to create without limitations. Robert stayed a little overtime just because the conversation was going well, and we got done with our chat at about 5:20. And at that point, I was absolutely beat. My camera had straight up run out of battery, so I didn't have video for the last 2 minutes of my chat with Robert, but that wasn't really a technical problem, and it doesn't really matter in those last 2 minutes. Not a big deal. But that's how I felt. I felt I was out of battery, exhausted, and the day was wrapping up very quickly as soon as Robert left my table. And you can see in the background of my interview with Robert, people are all packing up their stuff. Like, the day was over, and it was made really clear to us that we needed to be out of there by 6 because there was some other group that was going to be like, I don't know if they were coming in or if they had to set up for the next day or whatever the case, but it was clear that by 6 we had to go. I started to pack up my stuff a little bit, and then I realized, like, oh man, the day's over. My opportunities to talk to people is pretty much at its end here. And I didn't get to everybody I wanted to talk to. Talked to a couple of people. I talked to one of the guys from the Metal Summit for like a second. And that was cool because I've seen that show before. And those guys seem cool. I talked to a guy who's on A to Z Radio. He was really nice. He stopped by my booth to say hello. I like that guy. Steve Roth, again, came by my booth at some point, so I was able to talk to him a little bit more, and then that's when it dawned on me, oh, you're on DLR Cast, in addition to being the guy who sent me some books, so that was nice. One of the people I really wanted to talk to, who is a fellow Pantheon podcaster, was Brad Page from the I'm in Love with That Song podcast. So when I finished my interview with Robert, I looked over at Brad's booth and I saw he was packing up, and I thought, oh shoot, this is my last chance to, say hello, because I've listened to that podcast before and it's good. That dude's got a great radio voice and he does such great deep dives on these individual songs, and he's covered a lot of songs I really like, so I wanted to say hello and just let him know that I like his show. And I was able to make a quick intro, just introduce myself, and I don't know what it would be, but I told him I, at some point, definitely would love to have him on this podcast, maybe in an artist deep dive or something. I'm not sure what that'll be yet, but that's a guy who knows his stuff, so it would be cool to have him as a guest on at some point. And he was receptive to that, and we had a nice little conversation there for a second. So it was great to meet him, as well as everybody else I got a chance to meet. Like, I only wish that I had more time to meet, more of the people who are at Rocknpod, because everybody I talked to was really nice. Like, it's a good experience, especially because I was there on my own. In 2023, I was with my buddy Chris, so whenever there was a lull in the day, I could just talk to Chris. Well, this time I was there on my own, so I had to take what opportunities I could to, connect with the people I know a little bit. It's just cool to meet someone in person that you already know from the internet, Anyway, I also got a chance then to catch up with Aaron and Chris from Decibel Geek again. We kind of talked about our days. We had a nice conversation about how everything went. They were happy with how their day was, and it was just a cool vibe. But unfortunately, the clock was ticking down, and before I knew it, it was almost 6, and everyone's all packed up, except me, of course. Just about, at least. So I rushed back to my table, packed frantically, because I didn't want to, hold anybody up as far as the building crew went. And I got my stuff all in my duffel bag, and said my goodbyes to Aaron and Chris and some of the other people we were talking to. I was able to say goodbye and say thank you to Tracy McAndrew, who was the person who organized Rocknpod this year. She took over for Chris, and from my perspective, did an absolutely amazing job. Everything went so smoothly for me. Yeah, I was able to, tell her thank you in person, but I want to say it again here because I had a great experience, and I hope she knows that. I know everybody else had a great time too. It went really well. So congratulations to Tracy for pulling that off, because that is not an easy task. So I get out of the building, and of all things, this fairgrounds is right next to like a little stadium where the Nashville soccer team was playing, and there was a game going on as I'm leaving. So there's a whole bunch of cars trying to get into the area I'm trying to leave. So I probably did this in a way that was harder than it needed to be, but I ended up walking like half a mile in order to get to a cross street where I could call an Uber, get the Uber finally, and took the Uber back to my hotel. And again, getting back to the hotel, I am absolutely beat. No energy left. I think I ate like leftover pizza that I had from the night before for dinner that night, and I just stayed in and watched a little TV, decompressed, and fell asleep pretty early. I had previously thought about going out that night. I know a lot of the podcasters, they get together for some other event, which I didn't even know which one it was, that Saturday night. And I was absolutely too exhausted to go to any of that stuff. And I also had thought about just going across the street to a bar that me and Chris went to in 2023, because it's like the oldest bar in Nashville. It's not a great place, but I thought about popping in there just for memory's sake and having a quick beer, but I was too tired even to do that. So I just, got my stuff all packed up to head out on Sunday morning, and again, went to bed pretty early. So woke up on Sunday and just had a quick breakfast, made sure I was all packed and ready to go, and the only thing I did at the hotel before heading out for the day was I connected with Andy Connors, who I'd mentioned, the sound man of Rocknpod, the tech wizard, the guy who helped me out more than anybody else on that day. I was able to catch up with him because I needed to get the video and audio file of my panel discussion with Mark White. He had to reformat like a thumb drive or something for us to transfer it from his computer onto my computer. But we did all that. We had a great conversation. It was really cool talking with Andy. He's a great guy. And that just kind of wrapped up my Rocknpod experience on that Sunday morning. So I got the video from him on my laptop and took my luggage downstairs, left it with the concierge desk, and headed out for the day because my flight wasn't until like 9 p.m. and checkout was 11 a.m. I grabbed one of the Lime scooters and I went back down to Broadway for the last museum that I wanted to hit. That was the National Museum of African American Music. I got there a little after noon, which was shortly after they opened, and I spent, I think, about 2 hours there. And that place is really cool, too. I thought it was a great trilogy of museums I saw. Country Music, Musicians Hall of Fame, and National Museum of African American Music. Those are three great places for music fans in Nashville. So I highly recommend all three places. At one point in the National Museum of African American Music, you were able to mix your own like R&B song, and here's what I came up with.
Take it from the top, this time we can make it right. Give it all we got, there's new love in the air.
New Jack Swing. I guess I'm a fan of New Jack Swing. So that was fun. Yeah, it was just a fun experience. Got a lot of good pictures. So yeah, I got out of there at about 2 o'clock, went back over to Margaritaville to buy not just this zip-up hoodie, but also a beach towel for souvenirs from Margaritaville. And I know what you're thinking, and like I said before, I do not care. Oh, and then I should say, when I was in the Margaritaville packing this hoodie into my backpack, I looked out one of the windows, and the name of another bar in the neighborhood seemed to be making fun of us a little bit. It seemed that it was making fun of the people in Margaritaville. Maybe I'm projecting that onto us, but here, take a look at this. Yeah, notice anything there? So, got out of Margaritaville. I didn't eat there again. Instead, I just kind of walked up and down Broadway for a little bit. People call Nashville Nash Vegas because it's become such a tourist destination, and that's appropriately put, because walking around Broadway on a Sunday afternoon was crazy busy. There were so many people going in and out of all these places. It really felt like when I've been in Vegas, but when I've been in Vegas during like peak hours. On a Sunday afternoon in Nashville, it felt like a Saturday night in Vegas. So I will say that was crazy, just how many tourists are there at all hours of the day. So after walking around Broadway, at this point of the day, I am just killing time, and one way to kill some time is to go take a look at some of the murals I had heard about in Nashville. And the first one I went to go check out was of civil rights leader and American hero John Lewis. Very cool to see him honored in this city as such, so got a picture of that. And then from there, I walked over to a mural of Dolly Parton, Queen of Country Music, Dolly Parton. Felt very appropriate being in Nashville and seeing that mural, so I took a couple of pictures of that as well. And then there was really nothing else to do for the rest of the day, so I very slowly made my way back to the neighborhood where the hotel was. And then I think at about 5 or 6 o'clock, I made my way back to the hotel, got my luggage, hung out in the lobby for a little bit, and then at some point got my Uber and got to the airport, had a nice flight home, got home sometime around midnight, and that was it. That was my trip to Nashville and my time at Rocknpod 2025. A wholly positive experience. I really enjoyed myself. I had a great time catching up with people like Chris and Aaron and Jeannie. And it was so great to meet people like Steve and Andy and Brad. And then, of course, getting to interview the people I did. Everybody was really nice. I enjoyed talking to all of them. I at least felt that they all enjoyed talking with me. So all positive experiences, and the content I got out of the whole thing, I'm really happy with. I'm really proud of those interviews, and I'm glad they're all up online. And thanks to, again, Andy Connors, the panel discussion, which was the first time I've ever done something like that, I'm able to present here on this channel with good quality video and audio, and I'm really over the moon about that. Now, of course, it's way too early to say if there's going to be another Rocknpod in the future. I hope there is. But I will say, I don't necessarily hope that it'll be in 2026. I think part of the reason why I was so excited about this year is because there had been a 2-year gap instead of a 1-year gap. The one downside about Rocknpod that's inescapable is cost. Nashville's an expensive city to spend a weekend in. And I know Rocknpod keeps the prices for our booths as low as they possibly can, and I really appreciate that. But with the hotel, with the flights, with food and Ubers, and, you know, even though I was able to save with Lime scooters, I still had to take quite a few Ubers. That adds up. So it's an expensive ordeal. It's easily a $1,000 weekend, just like that. So having it every 2 years definitely makes the costs a little more feasible for me. But that's just my perspective. If they do it next year, I certainly hope I can go again. I don't know if they're going to keep doing it in that venue at the fairgrounds. This is the only time they've done the same venue twice, and I've been to both of those. I've been to both Rocknpods that were at the fairgrounds. The building seems a little big, and I do worry about how much that building is going to charge a convention like Rocknpod in the future. I would be really surprised if there wasn't an increase in price, which of course, you know, the convention has no choice but to pass on to us, the potential attendees. So I kind of dread that. I hope that's not the case. I'm definitely open to going again if they find a different venue, especially if it's a better price. But I don't assume that, and I wouldn't even ask that, given that Nashville is just an expensive city and it's really hard to get around that fact. But I'm also not going to assume there's going to be another one, because there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into this, and it's not fair to ask that of anybody. I mean, we are all very lucky to, first have Chris Czynszak, who got this thing started years ago and put his blood, sweat, and tears into getting this convention off the ground and really starting a legacy with these. But we also have to say thank you to Tracy McAndrew, who's done the same now this past year, but also has been working hand in hand with Chris at least in 2023. I don't know how far back they've been working together on these, but regardless, pulling this convention off is nothing short of a miracle. There is so much that goes into it, and I don't take that kind of thing for granted. I do not take for granted that this is something that can happen every year or even every other year or even again, because again of how much that needs to go into it. And on that point, I should say thank you to all of the volunteers who were working at Rocknpod, who got all of the guests over to the tables that they needed to be at. All of the volunteers I talked to were so nice. There was one woman, I think her name was Christina Perry, who took a lot of photos that day. That was awesome. I will say that would be another thing I would recommend if they had an official photographer who was going around getting pictures of everybody. That would have been really cool. But again, they're trying to keep costs low, so they can't just be bringing people in to do all that. So yeah, I just appreciate all of the volunteers for everything they did. I appreciate Tracy for how easy she made everything for me, including getting that panel opportunity. That was a surprise. I didn't ask to do that. They asked if I wanted to do that. And Chris recommended me for that, and I can't tell you how much that means to me. That was a big compliment and a great opportunity to do something like that. It was something I've wanted to do for some time, so I'm really glad I was able to do it. But yeah, hopefully there'll be more Rocknpods in the future. Hopefully this bonus episode here gives you an idea of what Rocknpod is all about and what that day actually looks like. And if they do another one and you're on the fence about going, hopefully this answers some questions for you. If you have any questions about the Rocknpod weekend, please post them in the comments below. I'm happy to answer anything that I didn't mention in this video, and I'm happy to expand upon anything that I did mention here. So please post whatever questions you have in the comments below. With that, I think I'll just call it here, and I'll say thank you very much for watching this video. I would highly recommend you check out the panel discussion I did with Mark White about his documentary, YNT On With The Show, and also my interviews with Billy Sheehan, Brian Forsyth from Kix, Jeannie Bassoni, Tom Zutot, and Robert Fleischman. And of course, finally, I would just recommend you subscribe to this YouTube channel and check out the podcast that I do, which is all about classic rock. So if you're a fan of any of the artists who were guests at Rocknpod this year, I would invite you to check out my channel and podcast, because I would bet that I have talked about an artist or interviewed an artist that you are also a fan of. But with that, I will just say thank you again so much for watching this video, and keep rocking.